our session. So we don't usually record Right Nights, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but for the purpose of our conference, we are recording this session. So welcome to our session, Empowering International Student Writers with Choices. As we get started with our session today, my colleague and I will position ourselves so that you can understand where we're coming from as we discuss our perspective and approach. So my name is Lydia and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a white settler cisgender woman. And I grew up going to school and playing with my neighbors in my second language. I learned how to read and write in my second language before I could do so in my first, which I suppose is when my fascination with language learning began. So I come to this space having been trained in the field of TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. And while my goal is to empower linguistically diverse students through programs and services that support their success, I recognize the colonial, classist, and inequitable nature of the applied linguistics and TESOL field, and I'm on a journey to decolonize my practices.
And hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Foerstner, and my pronouns are she, her. I am a white cis woman born and raised as a Canadian. My grandparents came to Canada after growing up as children in Germany during the Second World War, and the times being what they were, when they came to Canada, they did their best to shed their German identities and raise their children and my father as English-speaking Canadians. So it was really not until university that I connected with my German background and began pursuing a languages degree. And what I learned firsthand is how much of language learning is learning its culture. At graduate school, I studied globalization and further explored the connection between language, identity, and culture. And within my role at SASS, I seek to support undergraduate and graduate students with academic skills development as they navigate these intersectional waters of language, identity, and cultures within the hegemonic structures of the university. And so, to that end, our session today is entitled Empowering International Student Writers with Choices, but we hope to broaden our discussion and consider the multitude of ways that we might promote opportunities for students to disrupt these oppressive systems and assert autonomy, and places where we can make meaningful changes. We know that meaningful change must be sustainable and is often only achieved incrementally. And so we'd like to share how we've created a writing skills program that we feel walk this line between student empowerment and student service. Since academic success at university is often measured by the writing a student produces, we endeavor to support students in navigating the tensions embedded in the writing process so that they might make intentional choices regarding conventions, style, and structure in their written works. And we invite you to participate in a mock version of our program with the goal of offering inspiration for how you might adapt your own programming or think about the work that you do, and solicit discussion on how we as a community support international students and international student writers.
And so as previously mentioned, Alyssa and I joined the session today from Kingston, Ontario, which is situated on traditional Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe lands. And I pay respect to the original caretakers of these sacred lands that have nurtured and sustained many generations. And I invite you to pay respect to the original caretakers of the lands where you are currently located. Our session today is focused on empowerment and the English language, and we recognize that the English language has been a colonial tool for linguistic genocide on Turtle Island and around the world. And we recognize that in Canada, we are part of an educational system that has disempowered and continues to disempower Indigenous students. So we're working towards the decolonization of the educational programs and services that we coordinate for students. So to go over what our session will look like today, so we're going to spend a bit of time talking about what Right Nights is and why Right Nights. And then, as Alyssa mentioned, you'll get a bit of a mock session or sample of Right Nights, if you will. And then we'll get a chance to discuss your experience of Right Nights and ask us any questions you might have about it. So why Right Nights? So In 2018, QUIC, the Queen's International Center, underwent an external review, and out of that review came recommendations to the need to develop or improve supports for academic transition and the success of international students. And so one of the things that came out of that review was the creation of the Intercultural Academic Support Coordinator role, which I currently am fulfilling. And so it's a bit of a unique role because it is actually shared between Student Academic Success Services and the Queen's International Center. And with the creation of that role and Agnes Hera, who first held it, there was a significant increase in international students and students with English as an additional language accessing SASS's, Student Academic Success Services, one-on-one EAL appointments. In fact, there was a 300% increase that academic year. And my colleague Alyssa, the Academic Skills Support Coordinator, made note of, of all of these appointments where she was meeting with students. She made note of the patterns that that she would see. So many students asking similar questions about similar writing topics. And then out of that, Agnes and Alyssa developed a weekly writing workshop to support more students. So rather than always meeting one-on-one, you could have the option to meet in a group to discuss these writing topics. And to go over some of the theoretical pillars or approach to Write Nights, this interactive writing workshop, one of the main theoretical pillars is that it takes an anti-deficit approach. So working against the narrative that international students are problems or challenges to be fixed, or seeing linguistic diversity as a language deficiency rather than as a strength. So Write Night seeks to draw on the strengths of students while empowering them to understand and articulate the choices they make in their writing. Another important approach is that we focus on intercultural competence. So we use Deirdre's definition of intercultural competence, which focuses on developing awareness and knowledge about self and others, valuing and relativizing the beliefs and practices of the self and others, and the skills to interpret, relate, and communicate with others. So we try to acknowledge our own cultural biases and promote the influence culture has on academics, its expectations and structures. And then another shift was the move away from the term English as a second language to English as an additional language, to acknowledge the diversity amongst students, that for many within the Queen's community, English is an additional language, one of maybe many languages that they know in addition to their first language.
And so, perhaps this introduction has seemed a little heavy so far. And although we are transparent with our intentions, rather transparent about our intentions with students, at Write Nights, we don't get into the politics. We don't get into the theory really of what we're doing. At Write Nights, in practice, the goal is simple. We want to support students learn more about English grammar and writing conventions so that they are able to make stronger choices in their writing. And so practically speaking, every week we offer these different sessions. We have been offering them twice a week to accommodate students in different time zones and with different schedules. And we seek to develop a bit of a writing community. And so we have students from all degree levels joining all different programs, different academic backgrounds. It's very common to have a first year undergraduate history student and a master's of law student and someone doing their PhD in medicine, and everybody comes together on an equal playing field and contributes to a discussion about writing. And as Lydia mentioned, we really seek to leverage students' strengths and encourage them to share their experiences and think through their choices. And so Every session is focused on a different writing topic. Sometimes we go down to that nitty-gritty granular level and look at something like prepositions or article usage determiners. And sometimes we look at more broader topics like source integration or writing structure. But really what we're doing is we're analyzing these different conventions and trends and expectations that any student in any program at any level can expect to experience at the university, even if they look somewhat different across the disciplines and across the degrees. And our hope with Write Nights is that in looking at writing and being empowered to talk about choices and make choices and challenge choices, students will leave the sessions with increased confidence, with an increased ability to leverage their existing skills and acknowledge the skills they already have, with a desire to develop their authorial voice, figure out who they are as scholars and authors. We seek to refer to students at Write Nights as scholars, as contributing members of the university. And again, that choice-making piece is always key. We're very careful at Write Nights not to talk about right or wrong or good or bad, but rather to flip any question we get back to the students and say, well, why would you want to make that choice? What value does that bring to your writing? How is your reader going to interpret that? And so you'll see some of that in our mock session today. All right. So we also want to acknowledge that not everyone in this session necessarily works with students on writing, although looking at the attendance list, I know many of you do. So we have this little reflection question for you, and we'll come back to this after we do our mock Write Night session and have a discussion. And so the question we want to put out is you know, we all work and live within cultures and systems that create binaries. And we're all trained to follow dichotomous rules in some ways, or many, you know, often in many ways, you know, right? There's this right and a wrong way to do something. There's a good and a bad way to do something. Whatever your role is at the university, you've probably been presented with these binary rules. And so we ask you to consider a part of your professional or scholarly role where this has been true for you, where in your role where in your role, rather, might there be opportunities for you to perceive and make choices that are often overlooked? So thinking about some of the more fundamental kind of foundational ideas that Lydia and I have shared with you that have propelled Write Nights and helped us create the program, and how might those apply to where you're at and the job that you do? And so in the chat, Lydia, can you maybe share those documents again, or I can share them? We're going to share a couple documents with you, one of which is a group edit document. And so this will make more sense as we get into Write Nights, but on the bottom of the second page, there's this reflection question and there's some space. So as we're going through the session, if you want to just take notes of any thoughts you have, any questions, anything that you might want to bring up again in discussion, it's just, there's a place there for you to record those thoughts. And it's a shared document. So we can all, well, Lydia and I won't be contributing because we'll be busy, but you can all contribute to that document if you'd like, and we'll refer back to it at the end. All right.
So we are going to move into our mock session of Write Nights now. And so we will kind of go through our intro and give you a bit of our content. But as we do, we will kind of play our roles and break the fourth wall at certain points to maybe explain what we would do here, but maybe we're not going to dedicate, you know, a big time of today's session on it, or maybe explain something that we do throughout it. So so just to give you that heads up. But for now, I'm gonna move into Write Nights. And yeah, so usually we, at the beginning of a Write Night session, we give people a few minutes to, you know, come in the room, get set up, access the handouts, you know, that we put in the chat. When we find it's helpful to give that few minutes, but we put this this reflection question up that usually relates to, something that we're doing in the session that day to kind of get people warmed up and think about what we did last week and what we're going to do this week. And then let's see. So, and then after, about 5 minutes have passed, the countdown goes down, then we would move into our Right Night session. So welcome to our session this week. My name is Lydia, and I coordinate programs and services that support the academic success of international and linguistically diverse students. We're so glad that you've joined us today. Our topic this week is sentence variety. And so at this point, we would also do a land acknowledgement each week. And then each week we also highlight a resource or program or service that's relevant to the academic success of students who attend Right Night. So sometimes it's something at SASS, or sometimes it's something somewhere else on campus, a program that QUIC offers, or something else that's going on. We have been promoting international education at Queen's Conference for the last couple of weeks, but here I'm promoting the Academic Connections Certificate. So the Academic Connections Certificate allows you to uncover the academic expectations at Queen's University through programs and services about overcoming about academic success and overcoming academic culture shock. So participation in the Academic Connection Certificate is flexible. You can complete it in a few weeks, or you can complete it over the academic year, and you can engage, online and also in person. So we encourage you to get connected. But before we get started today, I want to review, briefly some Zoom housekeeping. So Right Night sessions are not recorded. This is a space just for those participating today. We seek to create a space where it's safe to ask any writing question or take writing risks and try something new within a community of supportive academic writings. Additionally, Alyssa and I don't have all the answers. Sometimes we'll ask questions, not knowing all of the possible answers. There's usually many options. And so sometimes we have to go and look things up ourselves and learn more about English writing conventions. And we look forward to learning together from each other. So obviously today's mock session of Right Nights is recorded, as part of the conference. But Alyssa and I just wanted to explain that we always try to emphasize that we want to create a space for dialogue and inquiry, for students to question and try out new things. So we thought that having, the space recorded may inhibit participation, even though some students would probably find it, helpful to access recordings, but to create the kind of space that we would like to, we've made this choice. Nonetheless, we hope that you feel comfortable to participate with us today, even though it is recorded. If you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera, though there's no requirement to do so. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask a question, you can raise your hand and turn on your mic, or type something in the chat box. Alyssa and I will both be monitoring the chat throughout the session. Lastly, we will post our feedback form in the chat, and we'd appreciate it if you take a moment to open it up and reflect on your skill and knowledge of today's Right Nights topic, sentence variety. And then you can return to that feedback form at the end of the session and reflect on your experience and what you've learned. So with that, I will pass it over to Alyssa, and I'm going to stop sharing our PowerPoint and move into sharing our document for today.
Thanks so much, Lydia. If you're interested, I put a link to our Right Nights feedback form in the chat. You don't need to fill that out. It's just if it would be helpful for you in whatever context you work in. All right, excellent. So you should have this handout. This is one of the things that students always receive for a Right Night session, and page 2 of every handout has some of these top takeaways. So we always start here and we talk about the topic at hand. And again, thinking back to that anti-deficit approach, we come into Right Night sessions assuming that most students have a foundational knowledge of whatever it is we're talking about. I will also at this point mention that while this program was developed with students who speak English as an additional language in mind, it is not exclusive to students who identify as having EAL. It is open to any registered Queen student, and especially within the online context, we've been seeing a number of students who, domestic or international, identify as having English as their first language, and it's been a really interesting dynamic and really wonderful to get all these different perspectives. And so the idea with this top takeaway page on our handout is to provide sometimes a refresher, sometimes to provide strategies, really to provide whatever contextual information we think will be most valuable for students so that we can actually practice applying this topic in a piece of academic writing. And so for today, our session is about sentence variety. That's the writing topic that we're looking at. And so I might remind you that there are different types of sentences, simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and we might have a discussion with students asking them to share examples or seeing if there's any questions. And then we might share some strategies as well. So for example, we know if you look at that third bullet, that variety in writing not only improves the text rhythm, but, and so that makes it more enjoyable for the reader, but it can also help your reader understand your ideas, right? So within these explanations, we really try to focus on the why. Why should you care about this? Why is this helpful? So for example, a short, simple sentence can relay emphasis, while a long compound sentence might show the connection between two topics. And so some strategies that you can apply in your own writing include highlighting sentences in different colors to get a visual of their length, and then revising your writing so you don't have multiple long, complex sentences next to each other. You might also look for trends in your writing. For example, maybe you have a tendency of using lots of relative clauses. Every sentence you write has comma which, comma which, comma which. Looking for those trends will help you figure out where you can increase the variety in your writing. And so at Write Nights, we would go through this in more depth, but for the purpose of this conference, I'm going to kind of leave that at that. And we also try to include resources on the bottom of that page. So SASS has a variety of wonderful resources, and we always link to SASS resources. And sometimes if there's a really excellent resource from another institution or an outside source, we'll link to that as well. And our contact information is there if students want to follow up. We also have a really great Microsoft Teams platform that we'll speak to later in the session. So now let's get into the paragraph. This is the heart of Write Nights. This is really what it's all about. So every week we take an example from an actual published piece of academic writing and then adapt it, sometimes more than others, so that it includes examples for us to work with that are related to the topic at hand. Often that means taking an excerpt, often the abstract of a paper, because then it's a little bit easier to understand the ideas as opposed to pulling a random paragraph from somewhere in the middle. And I'll take that abstract and edit it so that it has errors related to the grammatical topic or opportunities for the students to make different choices. And so that's exactly what has happened here. This paragraph comes from an article that was originally published by one of our colleagues, Dr. Lindsay Heggie, and her colleague, Dr. Wade Willey, in 2017. And the article is called Reading Longer Words, Insights into Multisyllabic Word Reading, from the journal Perspectives of the ASHA Special Interest Groups. And so you can see a note there. I've removed the citations for the purpose of this exercise. We always follow up after Write Nights with the original paragraph so students can see the differences. They can see how the author originally communicated their ideas and compare the choices that we made at Write Nights with the choices that the author originally made. But right now I'm going to start by reading through this paragraph as it stands. We always do this at Write Night, start by doing a full read through, and then we'll work through the paragraph sentence by sentence. Excuse me. So as it stands, the paragraph reads, some students have persistent reading difficulties. Many of the students with persistent reading difficulties are often especially challenged by multisyllabic words. Multisyllabic words require a systematic approach for reading and confidence to persevere on the part of the reader. Neither of these tend to be things that students with reading difficulties have. Beginning as early as grade 3, multisyllabic words, which make up the vast majority of English words, constitute an increasingly large portion of words in elementary school text, which magnifies the challenge that students with reading difficulties have. Multisyllabic words are more difficult to read simply because they are long. So, this poses challenges for working memory capacity, plus syllable boundaries, word stress, vowel pronunciation ambiguities, less predictable grapheme, phoneme, correspondences, and morphological complexity all contribute to long words difficulty. Research suggests that explicit instruction in both syllabic and morphological knowledge improve poor readers' multisyllabic word reading accuracy. So at this point, we might ask the group if there are any questions, generally vocabulary that needs to get flagged for clarity. And I'll also remind you, and I would remind Right Nights participants, that we are not content experts here. That is not our role. If reading and education is not your discipline, that's okay. As a group, we're talking about writing strategies, what's going on at that sentence level, and thinking about the communication approach that we can take here to really clarify the ideas. And so again, in the interest of time, we won't get into a general discussion, but let's get right into the beginning of this paragraph. And Lydia, what do you think about how this starts off?
Yeah. One other thing that I thought we should mention, which I'm not sure if you did, Alyssa, is that each week we focus on a different discipline. So, this week would be maybe education related, and another week we might look at mathematics or at engineering and psychology. So we do have every week a different discipline that we look at, and this academic year, all of the authors have been members of the Queen's community. So that's been a great change. But as far as this paragraph, looking at this paragraph, I noticed when you were reading, Alyssa, like these first few sentences felt very staccato, like there wasn't a nice flow. Sometimes when you read, you can kind of take a pause and find the transition, and it can sound maybe a little bit musical, but this sounded very choppy, is maybe how I would describe it. Anyone else out there feel that way with those first few sentences? Anyone else have any thoughts?
Feel free to raise your hand, just turn on your mic, or pop something in the chat. Choppy, choppy.
I'm not alone. That's great. Yeah, I think we have to consider how we can deal with this choppiness. Very curt. Yeah, it sounds like you're being, in academic writing, we do want to be direct. We do want to get to the point, but we don't like it to be too harsh. And so maybe it feels a bit that way here. And Johanna says, and Pamela both say repetitive. Yeah, we maybe see some of the same words repeating. And so sometimes we do that with keywords, but is there something else we could do? Susan says dull. So how can we change this? And so what I'd like us to do actually right off the bat here is we're going to move into breakout rooms. And for these first 4 sentences, we want you to try to find a way to connect them. So there's a bit more variety here. There's a bit more flow, not so choppy. And so maybe I can set up those breakout rooms. I think we'll do 2 rooms today. And we'll give you, how long do you think, Alyssa?
Why don't we do 8 to 10 minutes. The nice thing about this shared doc is we can kind of see where you're at with your edit. So let's say 8, and then if it looks like folks are still working, we'll push it to 10.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. It's 2:32 for me. So again, if you look at those first 4 sentences, and I actually didn't move into our edited document here, but you can see that now. Alyssa's bolded that for you, and you'll see on the second page that there are these group sentences. If you scroll down, you can edit those.
Yeah. We'll leave the main body as it is so that we've got a point of comparison for when we come back to discuss. There we go. All right, would somebody from group 2 be willing to share how your discussion went, what you talked about, and what changes you made? I think that was, yeah, Leslie.
I'm sorry, I was trying to give other people a chance. So we didn't actually finish, as you may see, but we tried, I lost it here. Thank you. To combine some sentences and get rid of the repetition was sort of what we had been focusing on before we stopped. And we flipped some of the sentences.
Yeah, you flipped some of the sentences. Awesome. So right now your version reads, some students have persistent reading difficulties, many of whom are especially challenged by multisyllabic words. To foster confidence and perseverance, a systemic approach is required for teaching multisyllabic words. Students with reading difficulties, and then that sentence would keep going. And so what were the discussions that you were having? How did you come to make these decisions, especially in terms of moving pieces around? Because whenever we start playing around with the order of information, we have to think about, I think your choices are great, but we always want to be thinking about how that's going to impact the reader. You know, something we talk about a lot at Write Nights is how academic English writing culture is a very linear writing culture, and it's writer responsible. So as the writer, it's your job to kind of feed your reader information one piece at a time in this straight line, knowing that your reader is going to take in that information in the order that you give it to them. So I'm curious, I think it was Samad, Leslie, and Basma. What were some of the discussions you had around moving the different parts of the sentence around? Basma?
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. So I think one of the discussions we had, our thinking was like, what's easy to follow for the reader? Mm-hmm. And if we flipped it around and put students at the beginning, the difficulties in the middle, and end with the fact that we're trying to foster confidence and perseverance, you see this order that makes it really easy to follow and have an idea of what's coming next, even potentially sort of signal to a methodology and the result.
Yeah, I think that's great. That thinking really reminds me kind of paragraph structure, a really foundational writing structure, this what, how, why model that we talk about at another topic, at another session at Write Nights, where, you first introduce an idea and maybe describe it a little bit, what's the difficulty? And then why does this difficulty matter? Well, it matters because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to foster this confidence, and this is how we have to address this difficulty. So I think those are some really excellent choices. And in terms of the sentence variety that we see here, we've definitely cut down on that choppiness. What about group 1? Does somebody from group 1 want to share how things went in your discussion? Not all at once. I'm just kidding. All at once.
You can see the version that we've produced is 2 lines versus the original 3 3/4 lines. Mm-hmm. So we found that actually that some of the information was, even though we have this sort of write a responsible language where it's our job to help the reader, there is also a limit, right? Where the first sentence here, some students have persistent reading difficulties. We figured if we're presumably going to spend the next 10 pages going on and on about this, that it's going to be so obvious that that is a level of orienting information that even we don't need in this, you know, whack you over the head with everything and make it obvious kind of writing that we do here. And then you can see that we were really struggling with the second sentence, or rather what is the third sentence in the original. The multisyllabic words require a systematic approach. Trying to figure out actually what any of it really meant was quite hard. And so we've come down with a version that actually is a little bit different to the other group's version of what it means. They're talking about, here's what we need to teach those words. And we're talking about, I think, what the reader themselves would need, you know, the student with the reading difficulties.
Yeah.
So yeah, good example of kind of making choices and having to work through these texts and figuring out what are you really trying to say and the impact that choices can have on that.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think the choices your group made are wonderful. You know, you really cut down on a lot of that repetition that was identified early. And I think you really, you know, hit the nail on the head, as they say. I try to avoid using idioms at right night, but there we go. Really identified a key issue, which is when you make changes at the sentence level, you're not just making these arbitrary grammatical changes that have no impact. You're really, you know, impacting what the reader is going to understand from your writing. What ideas are you putting forward? What are you emphasizing? What are you focusing on? And so thinking about it's always more difficult, you know, in a situation like this where we're not actually the authors. This is not actually our piece of writing. We don't actually know what the author was trying to say, but presumably if this were your piece of writing, you would know, or at least should know, what you're trying to say, and asking yourself these reflective questions. What is my priority? What does this sentence need to do? Or what does this introduction need to do? It's going to help you figure out how you can make that happen at the sentence level. Okay, so unfortunately, we've lost my colleague, Lydia. Due to technical.
I've returned.
Excellent. Okay, so we're gonna stop sharing this group edit document in a second here. That gives you a little bit of a taste. We wanted to start with the breakout room because that's something that we always try to do at Write Nights. Other tasks that we typically will do at an online version of Write Nights include a poll. We'll put up different polls about options that could be chosen to edit a sentence. We typically have an independent task. So there's an example of a poll. Feel free to answer if you want. We'll give students independent tasks. We'll have group discussions. Sometimes we'll annotate the document. We always encourage students to post in the chat. So really what we're trying to do is find multiple ways that people can interact and engage, regardless of their level of comfortability, their experience with tech, whatever it is. Lots of different ways to get involved. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Lydia, do you want to share the PowerPoint again? Perfect. All right, so we're back to our reflection question. And so I know that, this has been a brief session, not a lot of time to sit and reflect, but are there any thoughts on this? These binaries that we have to follow, being in roles where you're presented with a right and a wrong way, a good and a bad, and where might you find opportunities to make choices? Susan.
So I really like the fact that the sessions are focused on choices and on possibilities and like the plethora of choices that are available to writers in terms of making meaning. But what I also like is the way this is not a binary between non-native English speakers and native English speakers, because this is just writing, and any writer any scholar, any student should be thinking about writing in this way. And I think one of the things that we often learn or reflect on, maybe, or hopefully reflect on, when we're creating programs for non-native English speakers, is how much our native English speakers, native English writers need the same sort of discussions and the assumptions. We have assumptions. You talked early on about assumptions sometimes people make about students whose first language is not English, then having to write and communicate in English. But we make a lot of assumptions as well, I think, about our native speaking students that are also not founded on reality, and that it's important that I think we approach people in these particular contexts as writers. Everyone's trying to do the same thing. Everyone's trying to create meaning and communicate that meaning in a meaningful way. And I love this program. I think the approach is excellent and would serve any student who's thinking about writing and should be thinking about choices.
Thank you so much, Susan. Does anybody else have any thoughts either about Write Nights, the program, or any reflections on your own role at the university? Yeah, Basma.
So yeah, I'm in that interesting role of being an EAL instructor, taking a break from it this semester, but also TAing for the English literature department. Very different approaches in both spaces. And specifically, I was just thinking of how important this is for students taking an English course, because it's a mix of students. It's international students and quote unquote native speakers. And a lot of the time what's missing is that they don't know how to write for specific audiences and how to adjust to that. In my role as an English TA, I always find myself sort of torn in that binary, because there is often like a penalizing if something is grammatically wrong, like taking off 2% each time. So one thing that I try to do in my role is I really make it clear to the students. I'm just like, I'll mark it once and I'm not going to keep marking it. And then I'm going to look at your ideas, because I just think there's no point in repeatedly marking it and like focusing on it for one assignment. Instead, I try to give them feedback on one thing and then frame it in a, this is what you're doing really well, and this is how you can improve. And I really hope some of my students from the English department come to the Write Night.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Pamela, do you want to add to that or respond?
Yeah, Basma and I actually have worked together with similar students as well. So in the EAL situation, and with the perspective we sort of work at and with is trying to determine which kinds of what they would consider errors, not necessarily what I would consider errors, but they would consider their grammatical errors, how many of those really interfere with comprehension for their audience. And trying to point out that many of the things that they are concerned about, or this sort of, your verb tense is wrong, and they would see that as a binary wrong thing, can be easily fixed and doesn't interfere with comprehension. Whereas many of the things that we're talking about now in terms of sentence structure are choices, and maybe that their efforts should be on that rather than their concerns with my right or wrong grammar from an ESL perspective or EAL perspective.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those contributions. I'm just noticing the time. So Lydia, maybe we can hit that last slide.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your reflections. Get this PowerPoint going. Yeah, and so I've already talked a little bit about the academic connection certificate and what that is, but it is closely tied to our approach as far as empowering students with the strengths that they are bringing to the space at Queen's, but then also supporting them by getting to those hidden assumptions and expectations in this academic context. But something else that we've started this semester is a Microsoft Teams group specifically for academic English support. So now anyone who registers for Write Nights, or we also have a new academic speaking lab program called Speak Up, we automatically get them connected to a Microsoft team for academic English support, where they can ask questions between programs, or maybe they haven't attended a program in a while, they just came once or twice, but then suddenly they might have a question. We can let them know about other programs and services. We post resources on there, and there's no, I can't remember how many people are in it now, Alyssa. I don't know if you've looked recently, but there are dozens of students in it now, and they'll just come on and ask a question, and sometimes they'll answer one another question, or they'll put their own feedback in, or maybe I'll share a resource after Write Nights. That's where I post, the original paragraph. So you saw the paragraph that had been changed. So every week I go in and I post the original paragraph there so that they can compare the choices that they made versus the choices that the original author made. And then sometimes I'll post a resource, or Alyssa will post a resource, and then a student will come in and they'll post another one, a resource, and make a recommendation. And so it's very much, our intention is to be this collaborative space, and where everyone gets to contribute and to talk about their choices, and to talk about how when they read something, this is how they affected it, how it affected them as a reader. And so the team has been an extension of what we're doing in a lot of our other programs, and it's been great to see that.
All right. So we're going to finish up here. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sticking with us through more technical difficulties than expected. I hope it didn't seem as chaotic on your end as it did on the back end. I have just posted our feedback form in the chat. This is the first time we're doing an international education at Queen's conference, but we do hope to continue this in future years. International Education Week happens every year in the third week of November. So please share your thoughts with us on what you'd like to see for future conferences. And thank you for your participation and collaboration. If you have any questions, Lydia and I are here. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you at other sessions throughout the week.
Thanks for coming, everyone.